Next, allegations of CIA drug trafficking. Monday, the House Select Committee on Intelligence heard testimony concerning a report alleging the agency's involvement in trafficking cocaine to the Los Angeles area. Florida Congressman Porter Goss chaired yesterday's hearing, which includes testimony from California Representatives Maxine Waters and Juanita Millender McDonald.
Sometimes they take it, sometimes it's live. I can't tell anything. All that stuff they make.
Committee will be in order. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The committee, House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, is here today to review the report of the CIA Inspector General regarding allegations made in a 1996 newspaper series that the CIA was involved in the trafficking of crack cocaine to California during the 1980s. Before we begin, I'd like to advise members and the public today of how we intend to proceed with the hearing. The House National Security Committee has graciously allowed us the use of this room this afternoon, and we appreciate it and say thank you for that. We have been advised, however, that our lease on this space does expire at approximately 5 o'clock, and so we're planning that our proceedings will end accordingly. At the conclusion of my opening statement, I will recognize my colleagues on the committee for any opening remarks they wish to make, and I'm advised they do. Then we will proceed to hear from members of Congress who are not on our committee who have indicated their interest in sharing their assessment of the CIA IG report. We will then proceed with the testimony of Mr. Frederick P. Hitz, the Inspector General of the CIA, beginning his presentation no later than 4 p.m. I thank all present here today for assisting us in sticking to this schedule. Today's hearing marks an important step in the ongoing process of inquiry the Intelligence Committee has undertaken to assess the validity of highly serious allegations presented in a three-part series of newspaper articles published in the San Jose Mercury News at the end of the summer of 1996. Those articles detailed allegations that the CIA was involved with or was somehow complicit in the trafficking of crack cocaine to California during the 1980s. The articles further allege that proceeds from those transactions were used to assist in financing the activities of the resistance movement in Nicaragua, known to most of us simply as the Contras. This committee undertook an investigation into these charges in the fall of 1996. Since that time, we have interviewed more than 24 individuals who may have knowledge or information relevant to the allegations put forth in the San Jose Mercury News stories. In addition, we have reviewed many thousands of pages of original documents from the CIA that have direct relevance to our inquiry. During this time, two separate Inspector General investigations have been conducted. The CIA IG's review, which is the subject of today's hearing, resulted in the public release in January of this year of Volume 1 of an expected 2-volume report. A second volume, which goes beyond the allegations relating to the California story, is, we are told, nearing completion. There has also been an investigation conducted by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. Although that inquiry isn't concluded, we are told, we have also been advised that the Attorney General, the Department of DOJ, is for the time being withholding public release of the IG's report based on law enforcement concerns. As we proceed with our own inquiry, our committee is grateful for the work of the CIA IG on the matter before us. It is my judgment, based on a careful reading of Volume 1 of the report, which is a public document, that it is thorough and it represents months of careful review of the allegations and relevant facts pertaining to the allegations raised in the San Jose Mercury News. Given the serious nature of the allegations that had been raised, this investigation has to be especially thorough and persistent. Of course, we are continuing to conduct our own independent inquiry into this matter as part of our proper oversight responsibilities. We are keenly aware that this entire episode has fueled suspicions some people have about the advent of the scourge of crack cocaine in the United States. Any suggestion of government complicity in that terrible outcome is one that must be seriously considered and answered. It is our obligation as the committee charged with the responsibility of overseeing the CIA to address these concerns, to examine the facts as exhaustively as possible. It will be extremely difficult to come up with an absolute answer that will remove all doubt. Such is the nature of these cases. That said, I believe the American people have a right to expect us to do a conscientious job in understanding the facts and in offering conclusions from this committee about the charges that have been made. I believe that the CIA IG has presented our committee with a solid body of work that will assist us in that regard, and we intend to consider his conclusions very carefully. That is exactly what we are doing today, and what we will continue to do until we are satisfied that we have fully reviewed this matter. Our inquiry will continue as we proceed to conduct interviews and research as necessary. We will review the additional work product of the CIA IG when it becomes available to us, as well as the DOJ IG report when the Attorney General releases it. Additional hearings and public statements by this committee as to the progress of our work will be forthcoming as we deem appropriate in the committee. With that, let me again welcome our witness today, my colleagues, and I yield to Mr. Dix for opening remarks he may wish to make, and other members as well. We welcome Mrs. Harmon and Mr. Gibbons, who have come in since the gavel went down. Mr. Dix.
Mr. Chairman, it would be difficult to overstate the seriousness of the allegations generated by the series of articles that appeared in the San Jose Mercury News in August of 1996. That any agency of government would be charged with being associated with illegal activity is bad enough. That the allegations would involve the CIA, whose activities must necessarily take place in secret and are therefore not generally scrutinized by the public, make it worse. Add the fact that the illegal activity involved narcotics trafficking, one of the chief law enforcement and security challenges facing the nation. And the reason for concern in Congress, within the administration to include the President, and in the country should be obvious. Early in September of 1996, after being assured by Director of Central Intelligence John Deutsch that the CIA's Inspector General would conduct a thorough investigation of the issues raised by the Mercury News-ish series, I asked the committee's former chairman, Congressman Larry Combest, that our panel conduct its own inquiry. I commend Mr. Combest for his decision to authorize a committee review, and I commend our current chairman, Mr. Goss, for his decision in March of 1997, when he became chairman, to rededicate the committee to this effort as a priority in the 105th Congress. I continue to believe that as important as the reports of the CIA and the Justice Department Inspector Generals are, the committee's independent inquiry is essential. I've seen Mr. Hitz's investigation characterized as the most extensive undertaken by the Inspector General. The statistics on numbers of pages of documents reviewed and numbers of people interviewed are impressive. The task of proving a negative is always daunting, at least in part because you begin with the certain knowledge that you cannot reach conclusions with which everyone will agree. The best defense against unjustifiable criticism of an investigation of this kind, however, is to ensure that it is as exhaustive as possible. In the two-page summary of Volume 1 released by the CIA on January 29, 1998, the phrase "no information has been found" was used 9 times. I want to be assured that this phrase was meant to convey the message that no information was found on a certain point because none existed, rather than the message that the information was not found because the effort to find it was not thorough enough. The public's judgment about the adequacy of the work of the Inspector General's investigators will be what ultimately sustains or calls into question the conclusions of this report. There have been published criticisms by at least one of those contacted by Mr. Hitz's staff that the interview seemed to be designed to go through the motions. I want Mr. Hitz, who I've known and have great respect for, to assure us that he is satisfied that the investigation was as thorough as necessary to uncover the facts on the matter at hand. I understand that a number of persons, almost all of them former CIA officials, either refused to be interviewed or sought to limit the interviews. At least one of the individuals who refused to be interviewed by the Inspector General showed no similar reluctance to be interviewed by the press. I consider the failure of these people to assist the Inspector General in this investigation to be inexcusable. The President, the Attorney General, and the Director of Central Intelligence promised the American people in 1996 that the executive branch's inquiry would get to the bottom of the Mercury News-related charges. That effort has not been helped by the decision by some individuals not to be cooperative. I look forward to discussing with these individuals soon the reasons for their decisions and the information they may have about the subject of the Inspector General's inquiry. When DCI Tenet released the Volume 1 report on January 29th, he noted that the concern at the CIA that the allegations had left an indelible impression that the CIA was somehow responsible for the inner-city drug scourge and that nothing could be done to undo that damage caused by that false impression. It is regrettable indeed that what was at stake for the CIA's reputation in this matter was not more clearly seen by all of those from whom the Inspector General sought cooperation. One of my chief concerns in this matter has been that the investigation not be too narrowly focused. I wrote to DCI Deutsch in September of 1996, advising him that I was particularly interested in the extent of knowledge by CIA officials of any involvement of members of the Nicaraguan Contras or individuals associated with them in drug-running activities, when that knowledge was obtained, and what was done with the information. I was assured by a CIA official on September 17th that the Director shares your view that the extent and disposition of any knowledge by CIA officials of Contra involvement in drug trafficking must be assessed. I understand that much of that assessment takes place in Volume 2, and I look forward to discussing it with the Inspector General when that volume is made available to us. Mr. Chairman, I look forward as well to the comments our Congressional Committee will have on Mr. Hitz's work. I encourage them to make available to us any information they may have on the matters before us. I welcome them, and I welcome Mr. Hitz and his presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dix, very much. I have been advised other members wish to have opening remarks. At this time, I recognize the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Julian Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I join you and the ranking minority member in welcoming members of Congress and Mr. Fred Hitz, Inspector General of the Central Intelligence Agency. Let me begin by saying that I've read the Inspector General's report entitled Allegations of Connections Between the CIA and the Contras in Cocaine Trafficking in the United States, Volume 1, the California Story. I find the section of the report that chronicles the political history of Nicaragua from 1912, when U.S. Marines occupied Nicaragua to protect U.S. economic interests, until the elections of Viola Chamorro on February 25, 1990, was extremely valuable and insightful. For it's important to know that the Contras never were a single unitary organization. The term Contras, meaning counter-revolutionaries, was one used to identify organized forces opposed to the Sandinista regime. In my view, one cannot begin to understand the forces at play in Nicaragua's revolution without having this historical recounting as a foundation. It is apparent to me that Nicaraguans of various political persuasions made financial contributions to the Contras and to the Sandinistas. Some of these contributions were undoubtedly the results of proceeds from illegal activities such as narcotics trafficking. Nevertheless, the mere fact that an organization receives support from the fruits of illegal activities does not necessarily mean that the organization itself nor its causes are illegitimate. For example, Ricky Ross acknowledges donating some of his crack proceeds to inner-city community programs. These programs provide alternative after-school activities for our youth and are worthwhile and valuable, and in no way are diminished by the fact that some drug proceeds contributed to the operating capabilities. As has been said by the chairman and the ranking member, we're here today as a result of a three-part series of articles entitled Dark Alliance, published in the San Jose Mercury News. This series of articles allege that the CIA, in conjunction with the Nicaraguan drug network, introduce crack cocaine into Los Angeles, and then funnel proceeds from the sales of crack to Contras to help fund their war against the ruling Sandinista government. In the high speed of the digital age of information technology, the Dark Alliance series quickly spread from beyond the Mercury News readers. The series was placed on the paper's website of the Internet, where, according to the Mercury News, it received more than 1,000 hits a week. Additionally, talk show stations made it their leading story for weeks, and network television gave considerable time to reporting the story on the evening news. The fact that the story has resonated so powerfully outside the minority communities should not come as a surprise. The plague of crack is no different from the way that alcohol and other drugs have infiltrated communities across America, leaving a path of death and destruction in its wake. There are no sole alliances between crack cocaine and minority communities. The spread of crack cocaine in predominantly majority suburban communities is well documented and no longer remains a secret. Whether drug use occurs in minority or majority communities is not the issue. I firmly believe that we in Congress, as well as the administration, have placed a tremendous amount of emphasis as well as dedicated resources to efforts designed to combat narcotics. Drugs tear at the very fiber of our nation, the family structure. Caucasian, Asian, African American, and Hispanic families have begun to be destabilized by drugs, resulting in lost generations of our youth and raising drug-related crimes. The allegation that an entity of the federal government may have been involved in the trafficking of crack cocaine in any community of America are serious charges and deserve the attention of the highest level of government. As a demonstration of the seriousness attached to the Mercury News allegations, as Mr. Dix has indicated, the former director of Central Intelligence Agency, John Dortch, made an appearance in South Central Los Angeles to reaffirm his commitment to undertake a thorough internal investigation and to definitively respond to all questions surrounding this matter. Today's hearing is an extension of this committee's commitment to effectively discharge our oversight responsibility and independently investigate the allegations raised by this series of articles. In the aftermath of the Mercury News series, a number of newspapers initiated their own investigation of the allegations of CIA involvement in drug trafficking in support of the Contras. The Los Angeles Times was one newspaper and concluded, and I quote, that crack epidemic in Los Angeles followed no blueprint or master plan. It was not orchestrated by the Contras or the CIA or any single drug ring. No one trafficker, even the kingpins who sold thousands of kilos and pocketed millions of dollars, ever came close to monopolizing the trade, end of quote. The New York Times and the Washington Post, too, reached similar conclusions as a result of their own independent investigation. After allegations raised by a postscript Mercury News article is that within 48 hours of the execution of a search warrant by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department on a number of alleged Contra sympathizers, CIA agents showed up at the Sheriff's Department and removed evidence that had been seized. The Sheriff's Department of Los Angeles County has investigated these allegations, along with assertions that local narcotics agents knew that a drug ring operated by Nicaraguan Contra rebels was selling large amounts of cocaine and using the profits to support the armed conflict in Nicaragua. The Sheriff's Department's investigation concluded that no evidence had been found and that no materials had been removed from their custody by anybody, and that there was no evidence to support the claim that local law enforcement officers knew of a Nicaraguan-backed cocaine ring. The House Intelligence Committee is in possession of a 4-volume sheriff's report totaling more than 4,000 papers. On Sunday, May 11th, the San Jose Mercury News executive editor, Jerry Seps, wrote an article entitled "To the Readers of Our Dark Alliance Series." that identified certain shortcomings in the Dark Alliance article. Specifically, Mr. Sepps asserted that, quote, in a few instances, we presented only one interpretation of complicated, sometimes conflicting pieces of evidence. In one instance, we did not include information that contradicted a central assertion of the series. We made our best estimate of how much money was involved, but we failed to label it as an estimate and instead reported it as fact. We oversimplified the complex issue of how crack epidemic in America grew, and through the imprecise language and graphics, we created impressions that were open to misinterpretation. Notwithstanding the conclusions, Mr. Chairman, by various newspapers, the Sepps article, the Sheriff's Department internal investigation, and the CIA Inspector General, this committee firmly has a responsibility to independently review the Dark Alliance series. Our investigations are no substitute for the role this committee has in reviewing these serious allegations. We have convened today's hearing as one step, only one step in our investigatory process, and we are determined to discharge our oversight responsibility in a thorough and professional manner. To that end, I recognize that no matter how thorough any investigation may be, there will be skeptics who will challenge whatever conclusions are reached. It is not possible to persuade every individual with preordained conclusions to change them. What we will do is present the facts as we find them and then make conclusions based on these facts. Mr. Chairman, as earlier stated, although the San Jose Mercury News Dark Alliance series deals with the African American community in South Central Los Angeles, this issue impacts all Americans. The possibility that the government may have been involved in drug trafficking activities threatens the credibility of all government agencies and entities. A government of the people and by the people must not be permitted to engage in such activities. When allegations of government abuse come to our attention, we're obligated to use whatever resources necessary to fully and professionally investigate the charges. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank the committee staff who have, in my view, diligently worked on this investigation to date. There is a lot of work to be done, but I appreciate the cooperation that we have received from our staffs.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. I would like to point out that I, too, am grateful for the particular attention you have given this matter. Surely, with your many duties, the extra work you've put in on this is well noticed and much appreciated. I'd like to advise members who came in late that we have two speakers I know of, two of our colleagues who wish to address us, and they've been advised they will have about 10 minutes each. We are trying to start Mr. Hitz at 4 o'clock. If you'll look at the clock on the wall, you will understand my admonition that the opening statements be kept within reason, please. Mr. Skelton.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I join my colleagues in welcoming our congressional witnesses and the Inspector General of the Central Intelligence Agency, Mr. Fred Hitz, to our committee this afternoon. As the ranking Democratic committee of the National Security Committee, I'm well aware of the commitment that our nation's defense establishment has made to combating the importation of drugs into our country. An allegation that an agency of the federal government is alleged to have been involved in trafficking cocaine into the United States, while other federal agencies, including the Defense Department, are dedicating personnel and resources to fighting a war against drugs, Mr. Chairman, is horrendous. I'm pleased that this committee is investigating these allegations and to the greatest extent possible holding hearings in a public forum so that the American public can review our proceedings. It's important that any inquiry to first obtain all the facts is necessary. Once the facts are collected, they can be analyzed and conclusions can be reached. Today's hearing is part of the information gathering process. The facts brought out by this hearing will become part of the factual basis that this committee uses to reach a final conclusion. As has already been stated by my colleagues, the C.I.A. Inspector General is working on Volume 2 of his report that addresses matters related to CIA's knowledge of drug trafficking by the Contras or persons associated with the Contra movement. Additionally, the Justice Department Inspector General has completed his report and the committee is awaiting its receipt. I do not believe it's possible to reach conclusions until all the facts have been received. I look forward to today's testimony in the hopes that it will shed additional light on this matter. I also want to commend Mr. Fred Hitz and thank him for his service and dedication as the CIA's Inspector General. The position of Inspector General is often a lonely one. Frequently, Inspectors General are criticized by the public when their reports do not verify alleged misconduct and their objectivity is then called into question. Within an agency, the Inspector General is sometimes viewed as the villain who is out to harm the image and reputation of the agency. Mr. Hitz, you've weathered all types of criticism and have always maintained a professional attitude. I wish you all the best in whatever the future holds for you, and again, thank you for your service. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skelton. Ms. Harman of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a statement which I'd like to submit for the record, but I would, however, like to make a couple of summary points. First, I'd like to point out to the audience that a majority of the committee members are here, and I think that that speaks to the importance that we give to this issue. And I, too, would like to commend our colleague, Mr. Dixon, for his enormous personal attention on behalf of all of us. Second point, I did participate in 2 community forums hosted by our colleague, Ms. Melinda McDonald. I'd like to commend her for the work that she did and the abuse that she took and the effect it had on this member to clarify for me how really explosive this issue is in a community that has been racked by cocaine abuse, and I want to state to her and to all of you how seriously I take this issue. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that at the root of all this is one word: trust. A democratic society simply cannot function if the people believe that government agencies and officials participate in or condone illegal activities. And restoring trust will not be easy, but it is nonetheless an essential exercise for this committee. Speaking for one member, we cannot shirk from that responsibility, nor do I feel we will. And I want to thank you for a few minutes of time. Yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Harman, very much. Ms. Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend you and our ranking member for having this public hearing, unusual one for us on this committee. And I, too, want to commend Mr. Dixon for the attention the leadership that he has provided on this issue. I still have many questions, and I look forward to the Inspector General's presentation as well as the other witnesses here today. This is an issue of great concern in my community, San Francisco, that I represent in the Congress. For a long time, before this issue ever came to the forefront, there was a suspicion in our community that the African American community was a target, particularly women in the African American community were a target of a campaign to provide crack to them. The suspicions were that this would be to lead to undermining the African American community by undermining the family. It's a terrible, terrible thought, but people did come together in large meetings in our community on this subject long before this issue that we're dealing with today was involved. Add to that, around the same time, the Contra issue debate was raging in the Congress of the United States. We know how long the Iran-Contra hearings went on to see if there was a sale of weapons to Iran, profits of which to be diverted to the Contras circumventing Congress on that issue. So when this issue became public, there was already a foundation of distrust. And while we all know, many of us know more about the valuable contribution the Central Intelligence Agency has made, we also know of some shortcomings in the trust department between the American people and the agency. So you have a climate where people are saying what's happening to our community, crack, the cheapness of it, the availability of it, is undermining our community. Who's doing this to us? Secondly, why isn't somebody, how can we stop it? Therefore, when this story hit, there was a climate that made it a credible story. I myself do not think that the so-called retraction of the San Jose Mercury News was that weighty. It was, you know, a few instances we did this. We did not include an assertion that contradicted. We're an error about the money and oversimplified. That's not exactly a major retraction. So I still have, and my constituents, more importantly, my constituents still have some serious questions about this, as well as the particular interest that we have in the frogman, less attention has been paid to allegations concerning Northern California, particularly the so-called frogman case. During the prosecution of this case, the U.S. Attorney for Northern District of California agreed to return approximately $36,000 in cash seized from one defendant in this narcotic prosecution after two exiled Contra supporters wrote letters filed with the court that the money was for the reinstatement of democracy in Nicaragua, and that is in quote. So therefore, I look forward to hearing from the Inspector General concerning his findings that there's no information that the CIA had any connection with the defendants in the frogman case, and that there's no information that the Contras benefited from the drug trafficking of the frogman case. And I also anticipate questions as to whether officials of the CIA hampered in any way the investigation of the prosecution of this matter, because it hits us so directly at home in our community in Northern California. I still have some questions, even though I have reviewed the report. Once again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing us to have these questions out in the open.
Thank you, Ms. Pelosi. Mr. Skaggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I join in thanking the chair for calling these hearings. Want as well to express my respect and appreciation for Mr. Dixon's contribution to this effort, but want to make a special point of recognizing the public service of Fred Hitz to the country and to the Central Intelligence Agency. I've known him for some time, independent of his current position. And what I have to say, I think, really picks up on Ms. Harmon's comment about trust. Even this committee, authorized and assisted as we are by able staff to look into the workings of the intelligence community, ultimately have to rely on trust ourselves in sorting out fact from fiction from innuendo. The key individual with regard to the Central Intelligence Agency in establishing and nurturing a sense of trustworthiness in all of this is the Inspector General in the person of Mr. Hitz. I believe his conduct in office and his execution of his responsibilities have been absolutely key during my service on the committee to establishing the kind of trustworthiness in both directions that enables us to do our work for our colleagues and for the American people. And Fred, I just want to say thank you very much and Godspeed.
Thank you, Mr. Skaggs. Mr. Gibbons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I join my colleagues in commending you for having this hearing today, and I want to thank you for bringing it before the public as well. The importance and the seriousness of the allegations that have been before this committee on this issue merit this type of a hearing, and especially the proper resolution that this hearing can give this matter is critical. Critical both to the confidence of the American people in their agencies, critical to this oversight committee in its work that it must do in looking at and deciding these types of issues. You know, our nation depends upon this information, and it must have the confidence in the information that it is not tainted by any illegal act, an act that might undermine our ability to rely on this information. And it must not have any taint of illegality for the agency itself. Those agencies that provide valuable intelligence for anti-drug, economic, or military information must themselves, as I've said earlier, be untainted by illegal acts or even the innuendo of an illegality. The importance of this hearing today will hopefully clear the air on these issues, rebuild the confidence between the citizens of this country and our intelligence agencies, and finally, help in an equally important matter to rebuild the credibility and our confidence in the information and intelligence that we receive from these agencies. The men and women of our intelligence gathering agencies deserve no less than our complete confidence in their work to promote a better America. I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses, welcoming them here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Opening statements are completed. It's at this time that we welcome colleagues who are not on the committee for their commentary on the report that is the subject of this hearing. It is the report of the investigation, allegations of connections between C.I.A. and the Contras and cocaine trafficking to the United States, Volume 1, The California Story, January 29, 1998, as presented by Frederick P. Hitz, who we will be hearing from. It had been my intention to call members in order of seniority, but I have been advised that the senior member of the two that we expected to hear from has deferred to Juanita Melinda McDonald to come forward first, since you have been out front in trying to help us on this matter and come to grips with it, and that indeed have had hearings in your district and have had direct involvement. And we welcome you today. We welcome your commentary on the report and any observations you may have for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Before I begin my testimony, please allow me a moment to express my appreciation to you, Chairman Goss, and you, Ranking Member Dix, for your efforts and those of your colleagues on the House Permanent Select Committee of Intelligence to wade through the morass of allegations stemming from press reports of the Central Intelligence Agency's involvement in drug trafficking in South Central Los Angeles. I would especially like to acknowledge my Southern California colleagues on the committee, Congress members Jerry Lewis, Julian Dixon, and Jane Harmon, as well as Congressional Black Caucus Chairwoman Maxine Waters and California Delegation Co-Chairwoman Lucille Raubal-Allard. Their support of my efforts to give voice to the concerns of my constituents in the immediate aftermath of the controversial press reports alleging C.I.A. wrongdoing was encouraging and meant a great deal to me and the residents of California's 37th Congressional District. Mr. Chairman and committee members, I commend the Chairman for fulfilling his commitment to hold this hearing. Like the Chairman, I too was deeply disturbed by the allegations as reported in the San Jose Mercury News in August of 1996 of the Central Intelligence Agency's involvement in the introduction, financing, and distribution of crack cocaine in the 1980s. Consequently, I contacted administration officials, the appropriate leaders of the House of Representatives, and even the former UN Secretary General to ask their respective organizations to look into these allegations. I also wrote to the mayors of major urban cities, many of whom responded by confirming that their cities witnessed a significant increase in drug trafficking and proliferation of cocaine use and abuse during the same time period. On September 11th, I introduced House Resolution 518 to establish a special select committee to look into these allegations. I did so, Mr. Chairman, not with any intent to slay the Permanent Select Committee, but because I believe the persistence of issues raised by this and other controversies about the CIA's accountability, the agency's ability to investigate itself, the public's desire and need for the truth, and the agency's mission in a post-Cold War world require much broader congressional involvement in these important proceedings. As many of you are aware, I convened 2 town hall meetings in the fall of 1996. In response to the widespread feelings of anxiety, public outrage, and concern throughout my district in the wake of news accounts which seemed to implicate the CIA in drug trafficking in the early and mid-1980s in South Central Los Angeles and urban America. The first town hall meeting at Compton Community College on October 19, 1996, was attended by hundreds of residents from my drug-ravaged community. The purpose of the Compton Congressional Inquiry was to educate myself and other members of Congress about the specific issues raised by allegations of U.S. government involvement in and knowledge of drug trafficking in South Central Los Angeles. I also sought out how the local community responded to the widespread harm caused by the scourge of substance abuse, regardless of the source or cause, and allowed them to seek answers to these allegations. I invited the Justice Inspector General Michael Bromwich to come and meet with leaders and members of the community so that they could express their concerns. Mr. Bromwich observed the proceedings of the congressional inquiry and took notes with a number of panelists testifying, including Ricky Ross' mother and Ricky Ross himself, via telephone from the San Jose Detention Center. On November 15th, in response to my invitation, then Director of Central Intelligence, John Dortch, made an unprecedented visit to Allen Locke High School in the Watts section of my district to directly address the concerns raised by my constituents and me, generated by these allegations during a public town hall meeting. His visit illustrated a new openness within the agency to wrestle with the issues raised by the San Jose Mercury News press reports, as well as the persistent skepticism with which the CIA denials of wrongdoing have been met by the public. Those media reports, some of which have since been retracted, suggested that the crack cocaine trade, which has devastated whole communities, was promulgated by official government activities under the aegis of the Central Intelligence Agency. While the public forum received widespread media coverage, a private meeting with community leaders, activists, and elected officials provided them with an opportunity to express their concerns and pose their questions directly to former Director Dortch. I am here today to articulate some of the concerns my constituents and I have about this report and the ongoing controversy. First, this report is merely the first volume of 2 and focuses on the allegations of connections between the CIA and the Contras as alleged in the San Jose Mercury News. A second unpublished volume presumes to address the findings related to the CIA's knowledge of any other alleged drug trafficking by the Contras or other persons associated with the Contra operation. Release of a third report, prepared by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, has been withheld on order of the Attorney General. Consequently, the results of the internal investigations by the CIA and the Department of Justice have yet to materialize. Therefore, the report is limited in scope. Nevertheless, several questions related to this first volume continue to be raised. Did CIA personnel or assets have any involvement in supplying or assisting drug traffickers in South Central Los Angeles and or elsewhere? The report answers this question in the negative. However, what are we to make of the questions raised by Defense Attorney Harold Braun, a panelist at the October 19th inquiry, who maintains that a suspect in the custody of the Los Angeles County Deputy Sheriff's was allowed to make a long-distance telephone call to Virginia after asserting he worked for the CIA. What evidence do we have in this report that this allegation was or is being pursued, given the report does not mention investigation of telephone logs? And if so, why? Did the CIA aggressively pursue its role, concluding the charge to collect, produce, and disseminate intelligence on foreign aspects of narcotics production and trafficking when it received information about possible Contra involvement in drug trafficking? We apparently have to wait until Volume 2 to know the answer to this question. However, the information provided in this report suggests that the CIA turned a blind eye, at best, to information that suggests drug trafficking by Contra operatives. Did the CIA personnel intercede on behalf of any Nicaraguan Contra figures or nationals opposed to the Sandinistas government in any drug-related investigation or prosecution by local, state, or federal personnel? This report responds to specific allegations, but the report does not address what the CIA could or should have done in pursuing the portion of the agency's charge that relates to collecting, producing, and disseminating intelligence on foreign aspects of narcotics production and trafficking. It remains unclear to me what the CIA actually did to investigate or direct its intelligence assets to determine whether any Contras were engaged in drug trafficking. Should the 250,000 pages of documents reviewed for this first volume be declassified and made available for public inspection? And the ultimate question is, can the CIA investigate itself? The Central Intelligence is unique among government agencies. By its very nature, the CIA's secrets and the rules of confidentiality make investigations difficult. Investigations into wrongdoing start at a disadvantage which turns the usual rules of American justice on its head, as the presumption of innocence is compromised by the agency's secrecy and the classification of documents. We are being asked to trust career employees of the agency to sort out and report the truth in the name of national security. Indeed, news reports which followed leaks regarding the content of this report last December suggest that some CIA personnel were neither nor seriously interviewed nor not questioned at all about what they knew. As a result, the public remains skeptical. Some will perceive that this hearing is premature and that this report by itself does not adequately address the allegations of the San Jose Mercury News that prompted the public outcry. To its credit, the series shed light on some very real problems that require real solutions, from substance abuse to CIA accountability. I look forward to subsequent hearings by this committee upon release of the other reports, at which time we may all be in a better position to make judgments. Nevertheless, I hope that the Select Committee will give their content, methodologies, and findings the scrutiny they deserve, and in a similar spirit of openness, make themselves available to my constituents to respond to any questions these reports generate. I believe such openness is critical to restoration of the credibility and public trust necessary to allow intelligence gathering activities, which by their nature are secretive, to coexist with democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Thank you very much, Ms. Melander-McDonald. That was a very fine statement, and you've raised some specific questions for the committee to take under consideration, and we shall. Just needed to advise you, your observation that some may consider this hearing premature. Interestingly enough, there are some who consider it to be late as well. It's hard to get it all right all the time. One of the reasons we felt it was important to have this hearing at this time is because Mr. Hitz is on to greater glories with new employment, we are advised, and we wanted to make sure we had the opportunity for him to explain his report to us as he could, and that is why we decided to do this today.
And Mr. Chairman, there's some of the problems that my constituents have. They say by the time they get accustomed to one person, he then leaves, and there's a new person on the horizon, and therefore they're not just they're not really sure whether or not those persons really have their teeth into the feelings and the emotions that have been raised by my constituents.
It's a fair observation, I'm sure, from your constituents' point of view. I assure you we intend to keep our teeth in this until we finish, and I don't plan to leave.
Thank you,
I don't
Mr.
think
Chairman.
any of my other colleagues, well, none of my other colleagues are planning to leave except to stay
involved. Seems that is also
involved.
premature.
To stay involved in any way they profitably can for the good of public service.
Thank you so much for the testimony.
Thank you very much, ma'am. At this time, then, I would call Maxine Waters from California's 35th District, and we are pleased to have you before us today, Maxine, to talk about the report that is being provided to us by Mr. Hitz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing. Certainly, it's not expected of the Intelligence Committee, and I'm very pleased that we have so many members present today. And I'd like to beg your indulgence. I know you spoke of a time limit, but it is very difficult to talk about all of this information in 10 minutes, but I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I possibly can. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm here today to testify about the failure of the Central Intelligence Agency to conduct a serious and thorough investigation into the allegations of CIA involvement in cocaine trafficking to fund its contra-war activities. Unfortunately, my fear that the CIA would be unable to investigate itself has been confirmed with this report. The Inspector General's report lacks credibility. It is fraught with contradictions and illogical conclusions. In a September 3, 1996 memo, then CIA Director John Deutsch laid out the framework for this investigation. In his instructions to CIA Inspector General Frederick P. Hitz, Director Deutsch stated, "I have no reason to believe that there is any substance to the allegations published in the Mercury News." Despite his premature conclusion, a serious, substantial, and credible investigation and interview process would have proven him wrong. If the CIA director's premature conclusion was meant to direct the final outcome, he has succeeded. This report's sweeping denial of the CIA's knowledge of drug trafficking related to the Contras defies the evidence and the logic that the CIA should have known. From the days of the CIA's first response to the allegations raised in the Dark Alliance series, many skeptics believe that the CIA could never produce a credible or truthful review of wrongdoings by its own agency. These skeptics could point, if they'd like, to this Sunday's Los Angeles Times to confirm their fears. The Times reported, in another case, that after 37 years, the CIA finally admitted publicly the most profound deception imaginable on an American family. Thomas Pete Ray and his top-secret squadron of National Guard bombers were shot down during a CIA bombing mission in the Bay of Pigs debacle. For 37 years, the CIA denied that Mr. Ray and his squadron even existed, much less were shot down by Cuban troops in 1961. Only this month, faced with a document obtained by a Freedom of Information Act request by the National Security Archives, did the CIA finally admit the truth 37 years later. My deep concern about the allegations raised in the Dark Alliance series that my government could have in any way been involved in or had knowledge of drug trafficking has caused me to spend much of my own time and resources to find out more about these allegations. After reading the Dark Alliance series, I interviewed Gary Webb, the writer of the series. And by the way, Mr. Chairman and members, Mr. Gary Webb is here today. He's sitting right here in this seat, and I invited him to come. He's put a lot of time and work into this investigation, and I have been working with him since the first day that I read it, and I think that he should be privy to all information as he continues his work in this area. I interviewed Gary Webb, the writer of the series. I invited him to come to my district in South Central Los Angeles to respond to questions from local residents. My community encouraged my investigation and supported me in my efforts to delve deeper into these allegations. I personally interviewed a number of key figures in the Dark Alliance series. I first met with and interviewed Mr. Alan Finster, who was the attorney for Ricky Ross. Then I drove to San Diego to the Metropolitan Detention Center, where I interviewed Mr. Ricky Ross, the young man who was trafficking in drugs in South Central Los Angeles that were being sold to him by Mr. Norman Meneses and Mr. Danilo Blandone. He was being held in the Metropolitan Detention Center facility on drug charges. I also then drove to a restaurant in the Valley where I met with Mr. Celerino Castillo, the DEA agent who had investigated the drug trafficking operation at Ilopango Airfield in El Salvador. Castillo had documented that the CIA directed this drug trafficking operation out of 2 hangars using Contra Supply Network as a route for shipping drugs into the United States. I then interviewed former LAPD officer Mike Rupert, who states he was forced to leave the LAPD after he uncovered a connection between the CIA and narcotic trafficking operations in California and Louisiana. Mr. Rupert also was interviewed by the CIA for its report. I met and had numerous telephone conversations with Mr. Jerry Gazzetta, a detective with the City of Bell and a key member of the multi-agency task force working with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department investigating the Blandone narcotics operation. Gazzetta was a level 1 informant whose information was the basis of the affidavit of LA Sheriff Tom Gorton that resulted in the October 1986 raid of the Blandone operation's 14 sites in Southern California. I visited the Records Division of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department and uncovered the sheriff's reports regarding the October 1986 drug bust. I was the first to obtain the copies of the documentation regarding the raids. They had said prior to that time that they did not exist, they could not be found, and I literally went in and by accident was able to access these documents, and they quickly tried to retrieve them from me, and of course I refused to leave until I had copies of what should have been public documents. On January 3rd, 1997, using my own personal funds, I flew to Nicaragua to meet with Enrique Miranda Jaime, a former Sandinista official and drug partner of Norman Meneses, a central figure in the allegations in the Dark Alliance series. I was contacted by someone who had information about the Colombian cartels and their connection to Norman Meneses. When I arrived in Nicaragua, I was taken to the prison in the town of Grenada by State Department representatives where I met with Miranda himself. Mr. Miranda told me some of the information that he gave to the CIA in this investigation, which is reported on pages 54 and 55 of the IG's report. Mr. Randa currently is in prison after being convicted for smuggling 764 kilos of cocaine with his partner Norman Meneses. Meneses told Miranda in detail that Meneses worked for the Contras and that his drug trafficking operation had the support of the CIA. Meneses also told Miranda that he was receiving support directly from Oliver North and passing on the funds to support Contra groups. I met with Mr. Thomas Borge, a former Sandinista interior minister and head of intelligence. Mr. Borge came to meet with me from Nicaragua to South Central Los Angeles and waited for hours until I completed a day-long schedule, and I then spent some 4 hours with him. I have also had numerous telephone conversations with Corel Talavera Baca, the girlfriend of Rafael Cornejo, who was a relative and part of Norman Meneses' drug trafficking organization, as well as a longtime business partner of Danilo Blandone, another central figure in the Dark Alliance series. I received information from Ms. Baca and Mr. Cornejo, who were connected to Carlos Ledera, a Colombian drug dealer and co-founder of the Medellin cartel. It was through Ledera's private island that the Medellin cartel moved massive amounts of cocaine to Miami and the United States. Ms. Baca had visited Carlos Ledera's private island and have information regarding the connection between Mr. Ledera and Norman Meneses. I've had over a half-dozen telephone conversations with her, and she has sent me information relative to that operation. I have looked into many of the main allegations raised in Gary Webb's series, and I've thoroughly reviewed the Inspector General's report. In addition, I have read many letters and reviewed volumes of information sent to me and have visited a large number of people who have claimed to have information about the drug dealing in South Central Los Angeles. In my informed opinion, Mr. Chairman, the CIA IG report and the investigation lacks credibility and its conclusions must be dismissed. Let me turn to some of the specifics of the Inspector General's report. The average reader likely will find the structure of this report bizarre and confusing. I also question the report's methodology, its sweeping conclusions, its cleverly worded denials, and its selective quoting of documents. The report states that 365 interviews were conducted, but only summarizes statements from 12 individuals connected to the South Central Los Angeles specific allegations. I have a list of over 70 individuals who should have been interviewed under oath by the CIA if the investigation was to be considered credible. Did the CIA interview all of these people? Because the report fails to list who was actually interviewed. We have no way of knowing. In addition, only 40 pages of this report, titled The California Story, actually deal with the allegations of the South Central crack cocaine Contra connection. The report mentions a half-dozen other CIA and Contra officials interviewed, but does not offer even a cursory summary of their testimony. So let me do what the report failed to do. The following individuals associated with the Contras are or were either CIA agents or CIA assets. Now, I'm going to name these individuals, and I'm going to say to you, Mr. Chairman and members, that even though the report cleverly refers to agents, we should be talking about agents and or assets. I am going to say to you today in no uncertain terms, Mr. Adolfo Calero was a CIA asset. And he didn't just start with Norwin Meneses. He started working with the American Embassy as a CIA asset, and many of the funds for aid were funneled through him. Mr. Enrique Bermudez was a CIA asset. Mr. Marcos Aguado, a Contra pilot and accused drug dealer. Mr. Francisco Avilas, a Contra official in Costa Rica. In the Frogman case, Mr. Ivan Gomez, CIA agent who accepted drug money from Mr. Meneses. Mr. Dagoberto Nunes, who ran a shrimp company for the Oliver North in Costa Rica. Rene Corvo, a Cuban-American who worked with the Contras in Costa Rica. Mr. Francisco Shanz, owner of the shrimp company for Oliver North in Costa Rica. Mr. Edmundo Meneses, American-trained Nicaraguan general and Norwin Meneses' brother. Mr. Sebastian Gonzalez, Contra leader in Costa Rica and drug partner of Meneses. I assert here today that these are all CIA assets, and I would challenge this committee to ask the Inspector General and others, perhaps in the CIA, to document for you whether or not my allegations are true. They should give you sworn testimony as to whether or not they have knowledge about the people that I'm submitting to you being assets of the CIA. Today, I'm asking this committee to obtain the written response from the CIA that either categorically confirms or denies they are or were CIA assets or agents. Another major problem with the investigation underlying the report was the CIA's lack of subpoena power. This meant that some of the most important CIA and other officials were never interviewed. 3 former unnamed senior CIA managers would only respond in writing. 6 other key CIA personnel and former DE agent Castillo refused to be interviewed. The CIA agents included Dwayne Claridge, Joseph Fernandez, and Claire George. All of these senior CIA officials had major responsibilities for the CIA's Contra operation. There can be no thorough investigation without sworn testimony from each of these individuals. They should be subpoenaed. Jose Fernandez was the former CIA station chief in Costa Rica while the Meneses drug organization was operating from there. Dwayne Dewey Claridge was the CIA officer who helped create the Contras at a time when the Meneses ring first began dealing cocaine for the FDN. His name also appeared in Oliver North's notebooks as being responsible for making quid pro quo deals with known drug king Manuel Noriega. Claridge summed up how serious he thought this investigation was when he told reporters in December 1997 that the CIA, quote, sent me questions that were bullshit, and I wrote back, they were a bunch of bullshit. When I spoke with journalists following the release of the report this past January, much to my surprise, they had to admit to me they had not even read the entire report. They admitted they had only read the glossy, 8-page summary which offered up unsubstantiated conclusions of the CIA's innocence and blanket denials of the Dark Alliance serious allegations. Had they only read the report in its entirety as I did, they would have learned that allegations of drug trafficking and connections between the Contras and the CIA were not new. In fact, the report even lists and summarizes some of the other investigations that found Contra involvement in drug trafficking. For example, the Senate Subcommittee on Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Operations, chaired by Senator John Kerry, conducted a 2-year investigation into allegations of Contra involvement in drugs and arms trafficking. The CIA Inspector General report summarizes some of the Kerry Commission's 1,166-page report's devastating findings on page 35 through 38. These are some of the admissions. Drug traffickers use the Contra war and their ties to the Contra as cover for their criminal enterprises in Honduras and Costa Rica. Assistance from the drug lords was crucial to the Contras. And the traffickers, in turn, promoted and protected their operations by associating with the Contra movement. Drug traffickers provided support to the Contras and used the supply network of the Contras. Contras knowingly received both financial and material assistance from the drug traffickers. In each case, one or another U.S. government agency had information regarding these matters either while they were occurring or immediately thereafter. Members of the Contra movement were involved in drug trafficking, including pilots who flew supplies for the Contras, mercenaries who worked for the Contras, and Contra supporters throughout Central America. Drug traffickers helped in the Contra supply operations through business relations with Contra groups. Drug traffickers contribute cash, weapons, planes, pilots, air supply services, and other materials to the Contras. U.S. Department funds authorized by Congress for humanitarian assistance was paid to drug traffickers. In some cases, these drug traffickers received the State Department's funds after having been indicted by federal law enforcement agencies on drug charges in other cases were the subject of pending investigations by those agencies. The FDN Contra Group moved Contra funds through a narcotics, drug trafficking, and money laundering operation. Drug trafficking for the Contra movement was done by some because they were told that their actions were either on behalf of or sanctioned by the U.S. government. Not included in the CIA IG report are other key findings by the Kerry Committee. Despite widespread trafficking through the war zones of northern Costa Rica, the Kerry Committee was unable to find a single case which was made on the basis of a tip or a report by an official of a U.S. intelligence agency. This, despite an executive order requiring intelligence agencies to report drug trafficking to law enforcement officials, and despite direct testimony that drug trafficking on the southern front was reported to the CIA officials. U.S. officials involved with the Contras knew that drug traffickers were using the Contra infrastructure and that the Contras were receiving assistance from drug profits. Yet they turned a blind eye and did not report these individuals to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. How can this report include these incriminating findings by elected officials, including Senators Kerry, Brock, and Moynihan, while others summarily dismissing any CIA knowledge of or involvement in Contra drug trafficking into the U.S. This is an outrageous contradiction. Moreover, the report is littered with damaging admissions. This report admits Norman Menezes was one of the biggest drug dealers in America, either north and south, and he supplied Danilo Blandone. Blandone, in turn, was the source who supplied Ricky Ross, and Blandone and Meneses did so unhindered by the CIA. It is unreasonable to think Meneses was connected to the CIA, given the Contras were a CIA creation and that the CIA handled every aspect of the Contra operation. Pages 20 through 24 of this report confirms that the CIA essentially created, funded, supplied, and trained the Contras, and that the CIA was intimately involved in determining their strategy and running their operations. Meneses was never arrested by U.S. law enforcement. He was permitted free entrance to the United States and even issued a visa. How was this allowed, and why was it allowed to continue? Let me just say that Meneses dealt drugs in the United States for over 10 years or more. Starting back in 1974, he was a drug dealer before he came to the United States. He was even involved in a murder in Nicaragua. He dealt drugs without any interference, without any intervention. He had assets and businesses in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, Congresswoman Pelosi referred to the Frogman case. When they tracked down some of Meneses' people, they tracked them to the very house that was connected with the Frogman case where many of those people were involved. Meneses was well known by the CIA, the DEA, the DIA, and everybody in the United States as a drug dealer who was supplying Danilo Blandone, who was supplying Ricky Ross. How he stayed in the United States all of those years, being known from 1974, selling drugs that ended up helping to support the Contras, and nobody, but nobody knew it, is absolutely amazing. Meneses was never arrested by the U.S. enforcement. He was permitted free entrance again to the United States and even issued a visa. How was this allowed, and why was it allowed to continue? The CIA and DEA records are full of knowledge about Meneses' drug dealing operation. This knowledge was substantiated in this report. Even this report. The CIA knew of his drug trafficking by 1984, and the DEA had known of his trafficking activities as early as 1974. Incredibly, the report fails to mention anything about the activities of Adolfo Calero, only mentioning that he was interviewed. He was the key Contra leader and CIA agent on the Southern Front. Damning public information ties Calero to drug trafficking. In a December 1986 interview, Calero told the Costa Rican newspaper La Nacion that he met with drug kingpin Norman Meneses at least 6 times, and that he knew Meneses was involved in drug trafficking. Now, in our investigations, we had found out that Meneses had met with Adolfo Calero, and that Meneses and Blandone had been going to these meetings both in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, despite the fact that these conclusions of these drug dealers having no connection to the Contras. Thank goodness your report did identify 6 visits. We only knew about 2. We have a picture of Meneses and Adolfo Calero and others at one of these Contra meetings that were going on all over California. In addition, there are many other key facts that were confirmed by this report. Drug kingpin Norman Meneses supported and was involved with the Contras. On page 76-77, drug dealer Norman Meneses admitted giving money to the California chapter of the FDN Contras, and that he was involved in the 1985 attempt to obtain material support, medical and general supplies for the Contra movement. Now, there are a lot of discrepancies about how much. You will find in your report, it differs somewhat with information that was testified to over on the Senate side when they held the semblance of a hearing over there. I have maintained that it does not matter how much money It does not matter whether or not it was, as Eden Pastora testified on that side, that he only got a few $1,000s and a couple of trucks, or it is an admission that Norman Meneses supplied about $40,000 plus medical supplies and other things. The fact of the matter is, the reason I'm so interested in this and the reason I'm so outraged by it, as a public elected officials, all of us must be concerned that our government could have anyway been involved in drug trafficking. Drug trafficking. That's a very, very serious offense against the people of this nation. We cannot afford to have our government, I don't care under what pretense, a covert operation or any kind of operation, involved in drug trafficking. Page 70 to 71 of the report documents the connection between CIA asset and FDN military leader Enrique Bermudez, Meneses, and Blandón. Blandón and Meneses traveled to Bolivia in 1982 to make a drug deal and stopped en route to Honduras. While in Honduras, Blandón and Meneses met Bermudez for the second time. Bermudez asked Blandón and Meneses to help raise money and supplies for the FDN. He let the drug traffickers know that their support would be welcome because, I quote, and everybody quotes, even your reported quotes, that he said, "The ends justifies the means." Blandón then describes how he and Meneses were escorted to airport by armed Contras after the meeting with Bermudez. Blandón left the meeting. He left this meeting with $100,000 in a bag to buy drugs. The profits from the sale of these drugs were to be used to buy supplies and fund the Contras. Blandón tells of how he ran into trouble at the airport in Honduras when he was caught with the $100,000. But guess what? Just like in the Frogman case, where they caught them with the dope and the money, and they returned the $36,000 based on that attorney general that you had in San Francisco having been told that it was Contra money, this man with $100,000 in drug money to buy more drugs for more supplies was assisted by the Contras at the airport. And even though it had stopped him, they had taken $100,000 out of his brief. With the intervention of the Contras, they gave it back to him. And he went along his merry way. Where did the $100,000 come from?
Begin to conclude the remarks.
Yes, I'm going to get there.
Very much appreciate, we've been over generous. We're taking away from time for the
I appreciate Mr. Goss, and I
know you have written remarks which we will accept for the record without objection.
Where did the $100,000 come from? Did they give back the $100,000 to Blandón because of the Contra C.I.A. connection? Well, Mr. Chairman and members, it's hard to refute and to help educate in 10 minutes. I'm going to submit this for the record, but I'm going to close by saying this. This report is not credible. This report does not do the job, Mr. Chairman. We owe it to ourselves as public policy makers to do something. Why do I do all of this? Because I want to find some CIA operatives, assets, or agents and somehow convict them. That's not going to happen. And I don't believe that, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I am trying to raise the level of this discussion because we've got some work to do as public policy makers. The least we could do is develop public policy that will indicate that drug trafficking can never be used in any covert operation, no matter what is being attempted. We cannot continue to put our heads in the sand. It's a shame what happened with the Kerry report. The idea that members of the Congress of the United States on the Senate side could have presented us with so much documentation, and then years later we have the investigation that was done by the San Jose Mercury, and we find more information about drug trafficking And either the CIA absolutely knowing or turning its head, and we still can't come up with public policy. At the same time, we're spending millions of dollars talking about a war on drugs. Give me a break, Mr. Chairman and members. We can do better than this. I will not go away, members. I cannot go away. My community has been devastated, as many communities across this nation. As a result of this work, I've been in at least 7 or 8 states with town hall meetings, including New York and New Jersey and St. Louis, and I continue to have several requests every week to come and do town hall meetings and radio stations, because people are outraged and concerned about the fact that somehow this drug problem won't go away, and the idea that the government could be involved. I challenge this committee to get involved with public policy that would get our government out of ever being involved in any way. And while you're doing this, why haven't something been said about General Davila in Honduras, who also was a CIA asset that was caught putting a ton of drugs into the airplane? The drugs found its way into the United States and was sold on the streets, and that was recently, and we still haven't heard a word. When I check with the Justice Department, they tell me they can't say anything. And I suppose you have information you can't say anything about. But I think somehow we've got to do better. The lives of our children and our communities are at stake. I thank you, and I submit this for the record, and more information and documents if you would like to have it.
Thank the gentlelady very much for her testimony. At this time, I would like to swear in Mr. Hitz.
Mr. Chairman, can I just say one
Yeah,
thing?
sure.
I want to commend Congresswoman Waters for the obvious amount of work and effort that she has made here. And I want you to know that we are certainly willing to meet with you and your staff. We want as much information as you have, so that, because we are in a, as you know, we're going to do an investigation of our own. The Inspector General is going to present his report, but this committee is pledged that we will have our own independent investigation. So all the work that you've done, we would like to benefit from it, and I compliment you for your efforts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dixon.
Thank you. We would obviously welcome from either of our 2 colleagues who are here today, or any other colleagues who may see these proceedings or be interested in this, any observations they have on this report, which is the subject of our hearing, which in fact we are now going to have officially presented to us by Mr. Hitz. Mr. Hitz, may I ask you to raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you for joining us today. I would advise members that Mr. Hitz went out of his way to accommodate our schedule. I believe he has been without sleep for at least a couple of days in order to travel back here, and we are obliged for that consideration.
Well,
I
I'm
yield the floor to you and hope that you will present comments you wish to on this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I assure the committee that I'm happy to be here today, and hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions irrespective of distance traveled. I feel a little bit as if we've had dessert first. Been a very serious and thorough discussion by the 2 congresspersons about their views of my report, and so I'm happy to have the occasion now to summarize it for you. And although this is a lengthy statement, I ask that you bear with me, because I think it's quite important to get it all in the record. When I appeared before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in open session on October 23, 1996, I reported that at the request of then Director of Central Intelligence John Deutsch on September 3, 1996, I immediately initiated an inquiry into the allegations that stemmed from a 3-part series called Dark Alliance that was published in the San Jose Mercury News in August of '96. That series discussed the drug trafficking activities of several individuals who had been implicated in cocaine trafficking in California. As you know, the series also suggested
that the Nicaraguan Contras, described as C.I.A.'s Army, benefited from the drug trafficking activities of Ricky Ross, Danilo Blandón, Norwin Meneses, and others, and that these activities were responsible for the emergence of crack cocaine in south central Los Angeles and elsewhere in America. The series also intimated that C.I.A. may have been involved in drug trafficking, or at least had knowledge of those activities and may have given its approval for them. On October 23, 1996, I promised Congress and the American people to have my office, quote, conduct as thorough a review as possible of all available information and report what we find candidly and completely. I am pleased to be able to come before this committee today and say that we have done just that. On December 17, 1997, we published our classified report of investigation of Volume 1 called The California Story, that specifically focused on C.I.A. knowledge of and actions taken regarding the individuals and events that were the focus of the Mercury News series. A little over a month later, on January 29th of this year, we released this report in an unclassified version following a classification review by the agency. I believe those of you on the committee who have read the classified version of Volume 1 and have had the opportunity to compare it with the unclassified version will agree that the information about this matter that is now publicly available does not differ in any significant way from that presented in the classified report. Our purpose is to provide the American public with the relevant facts without compromising information relating to the national security that the DCI is by law bound to protect. Our report presents an exhaustive array of facts and allows me to reiterate what I said before the Senate Select Committee in '96. We will present the unvarnished truth as we find it, and will do so to the best of our abilities. Today, I can say that we have done just that. We reviewed an estimated 250,000 pages of documents and used the information gleaned from these documents to conduct over 365 interviews of persons on 4 continents. These interviews included current and former directors and deputy directors of Central Intelligence, current and former senior agency staff personnel, secretaries, communicators, logistics personnel, operations officers, attorneys, present and former C.I.A. assets, contractors, law enforcement personnel, former Contra leaders, convicted drug traffickers, and others. Our investigative team went to great lengths to obtain relevant documents. We sent officers to the National Archives to review records compiled by the Office of Independent Counsel for Iran-Contra matters. We examined C.I.A.'s own Iran-Contra records that comprised about 300 linear feet of agency and other executive branch documents. We worked directly with DEA, FBI, and the Department of Justice IG to obtain relevant information from the files of those organizations. We reviewed reporting from other intelligence community agencies, including NSA and DIA, that had been shared with C.I.A. We contacted DOJ's National Drug Intelligence Center and DEA's El Paso Intelligence Center to seek further information. We reviewed available congressional records, including relevant information compiled by the Kerry Committee and the Intelligence Oversight Committees, and spoke with individuals associated with the Joint Iran-Contra Investigating Committee and Office of Independent Counsel for Iran-Contra matters. It is important to note, Mr. Chairman, that our investigation was not intended to prove or disprove allegations of drug trafficking by specific individuals or organizations. Rather, our 17-person team worked some 18 months to identify, and let me underscore, number one, any information in C.I.A.'s possession relating to Danilo Blandón, Norwin Meneses, or Ricky Ross. Number two, any information in C.I.A.'s possession relating to possible drug trafficking activities by the Contras in California and elsewhere in the United States, and what action, if any, C.I.A. may have taken upon receiving that information. And third, any contacts between CIA and law enforcement authorities regarding that information. I believe our investigation is the most comprehensive and exhaustive ever conducted by the CIA Office of Inspector General, and that the report of investigation reflects accurately what was found by our team. Having said that, one may ask if it is possible that there is some relevant document we did not find or some relevant person we did not interview that would alter our conclusions. As for the documents, the answer to that is yes, it is possible, but I do not believe it is likely. As for individuals, the report explains that 6 former CIA employees and a former DEA agent refused our request to be interviewed. We had no power to compel them to do so. Given the effort I have described, however, I do not believe it is likely that any significant information that would have substantially altered the conclusions of this volume has escaped our attention. Now let me turn to the findings of Volume 1. Before I go any further, I want to make clear that we found absolutely no evidence to indicate that CIA as an organization or its employees were involved in any conspiracy to bring drugs into the United States. The first half of Volume 1 discussed CIA knowledge of the activities of Ross, Blandone, and Menezes. Ross, Blandone, and Menezes are convicted drug dealers. Our investigation found no information to indicate that any past or present employee of CIA or anyone else acting on behalf of CIA had any dealings with Ross, Blandone, or Menezes, or had any knowledge of their drug trafficking activities. Ross was a drug dealer who, by his own admission, says his sole motivation was to derive personal financial gain from the illegal trafficking of drugs. During the 1980s, Ross was a major cocaine and crack trafficker who says he made millions in the drug trade. His activities helped to foster the crack epidemic that erupted in South Central Los Angeles. However, Ross told us that he never sold drugs for the Contras or donated any money to the Contras. CIA never had any relationship with Ross. Likewise, Blandone and Menezes also trafficked in drugs to derive personal financial gain. While CIA had no relationship with Blandone and Menezes, our investigation did find that Blandone and Menezes were affiliated with California Contra support organizations and each made financial contributions to those groups. Blandone and Menezes each claim to have provided between $3,000 and $40,000 worth of support to the Contras, although we found no information to substantiate these claims. Blandone claims that portions of his contributions were from the proceeds of his narcotics trafficking. Blandone states that he gave the impression when donating money that it was derived from his legitimate business activities, while Menezes claims his contributions were from the proceeds of legitimate business activities. Our investigation found that Blandone had a personal relationship with Contra leader Eden Pastora, and that he provided Pastora with assistance in the form of rent-free housing in Costa Rica and 2 used vehicles for personal transportation. Much of this assistance was provided to Pastora after he left the Contra movement. Blandone also claims Pastora was not aware he was engaged in drug trafficking. Pastora confirmed this when he testified before the Senate Select Committee in November of 1996. Blandone also says he met Contra leader Enrique Bermudez on 4 occasions from 1981 to 1983. Blandone states that one meeting occurred in Honduras in 1982 while he and Menezes were traveling to Bolivia to conduct a drug deal. Blandone says that Bermudez told them that the Contras were having trouble raising funds and asked that he and Menezes help, stating that the end justifies the means. Blandone adds that it is his belief Bermudez did not know that he and Menezes were engaged in drug trafficking, but was aware of Menezes' alleged Nicaraguan organized crime connections. This investigation found no further information on this subject. Unfortunately, we could not obtain information from Bermudez since he was murdered in Managua in 1991. No information has been found to indicate that CIA hindered or otherwise intervened in the investigation, arrest, prosecution, conviction, or sentencing of Ross, Blandone, or Menezes. Additionally, Ronald J. Lister or David Scott Weekly, who were mentioned in the media in connection with Blandone, had no relationship with CIA or its employees. Lister, a former police officer, trafficked in drugs for personal benefit and admits that people may have received the false impression that he was connected with CIA and that he may have fostered such misconceptions because it benefited his private security business. Our investigation also found no information to connect Weekly to the drug trafficking activities of Ross, Blandone, Menezes, or Lister. The second half of our Volume 1, the Northern California story, pertains to a case in San Francisco often referred to as the Frogman case. The case got its name when law enforcement authorities in San Francisco arrested several swimmers who had come ashore from a Colombian freighter on January 17, 1983. At the time of their arrest, the swimmers had with them some 430 pounds of cocaine. In all, some 12 arrests were made on January 17, and more followed soon thereafter, including the arrests of two Nicaraguans, Julio Zavala and Carlos Cabezas. Unlike the events relating to Ross, Blandone, or Menezes, this was a case where the CIA became involved because it mistakenly thought it had an interest to protect. CIA first learned of the Frogman case in late July 1984, about a year and a half after Zavala's arrest. At that time, CIA was informed that two representatives of the United States Attorney's Office in San Francisco, which was prosecuting Zavala, planned to attend depositions in Costa Rica from two members of Contra organizations who had provided Zavala with letters that claimed that some $36,000 that the authorities had seized from Zavala at the time of his arrest belonged to the Contras. CIA officials mistakenly identified one of the Contra members as a former CIA asset, and there was a concern that the depositions might expose a Contra support group in which CIA had an operational interest. No information was found to indicate that the two Contra officials who wrote the letters supporting Zavala or the organizations with which they were affiliated were involved in drug trafficking. Moreover, the principal author of the letters reportedly was later expelled from the Contra group when its leadership learned he had written the letter in support of Zavala's claim, and he could not satisfactorily explain the basis for his actions. In any event, an attorney from the CIA's Office of General Counsel met with the responsible prosecutor and possibly other representatives from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Prior to the CIA attorney's meeting with the prosecutor had discussed with one of Zavala's attorneys the possibility of returning the money to Zavala rather than expending the time and money necessary to travel to Costa Rica in connection with the depositions. That said, accounts differ as to why the money was returned to Zavala. The AUSA who prosecuted Zavala, the U.S. attorney at the time, Joseph Rossaniello, and others involved in the prosecution state that the decision to return the money to Zavala was not based on any CIA representations, but on their own judgment as to whether it was worth the time and expense to go to Costa Rica for the depositions. However, we found a CIA cable that was written soon after the CIA attorney had met with the responsible prosecutor. The cable indicated the money was returned to Zavala at CIA's request. Unfortunately, the CIA attorney cannot recall the facts of the case or the meeting in question. In summary, the key points I would emphasize with regard to the Frogman case are that, 1, whatever impact the CIA attorney may have ultimately had on the decision of the U.S. Attorney's Office to return the money to Zavala, we have found no evidence to indicate the return of the money weakened the prosecution's case against Zavala. Zavala was convicted and sent to prison. Secondly, Carlos Cabezas, who was also arrested and convicted in connection with the Frogman case, claims he was part of a network that sold cocaine for the Contras. We found no information to support his claim. We found no information, as stated in the Mercury News series, to connect Menezes with the Frogman case. Menezes says he was never part of the Zavala organization. Zavala and Cabezas confirm this assertion. We will soon be issuing Volume 2 of our report. Whereas Volume 1 focused on drug traffickers in California, Volume 2 will closely examine any other linkages between CIA, drug trafficking, the Contra program, and Contra leaders and organizations. In Volume 2, we will set the background by describing what at the time were CIA's legal and regulatory responsibilities, policies, and guidelines governing dealings with people and organizations that were subject to drug trafficking allegations. We will also explain the intelligence collection requirements that existed at the time concerning drug trafficking. However, the bulk of Volume 2, and it is bulky, approaching 600 pages, will be devoted to a detailed treatment of what was known to CIA regarding dozens of people and a number of companies connected in some fashion to the Contra program or the Contra movement that were the subject of any sort of drug trafficking allegations. Each is closely examined in terms of their relationship with CIA, the drug trafficking activity that was alleged, the actions CIA took in response to the allegations, and the extent of information concerning the allegations that was shared with U.S. law enforcement and the Congress. As I said earlier, we have found no evidence in the course of this lengthy investigation of any conspiracy by CIA or its employees to bring drugs into the United States. However, during the Contra era, CIA worked with a variety of people to support the Contra program. These included CIA assets, pilots who ferried supplies to the Contras, as well as Contra officials and others. Let me be frank about what we are finding. There are instances where CIA did not, in an expeditious or consistent fashion, cut off relationships with individuals supporting the Contra program who were alleged to have engaged in drug trafficking activity or take action to resolve the allegations. And I want to underscore the fact that we're talking about allegations here. Volume 2 will be delivered to the Director of Central Intelligence and the Intelligence Oversight Committees as a classified report near the end of this month. To the extent possible, we in the agency are committed to producing an unclassified version of Volume 2 as well, although the time required for that effort is uncertain. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I urge the American public to read Volume 1, which is available on the Internet at www.odci.gov/CIA. That report includes a great deal of information and quotes many documents. Those who read it will then see the full weight of our effort and be in a position to judge for themselves about our efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to answer your questions.
Mr. Hayes, thank you very much. I have spent a considerable amount of my life recently reading your materials, and I can tell you that I'm not looking forward to another 600 pages, but I am looking forward to getting through this matter as expeditiously and as thoroughly as we can. So it is good news to hear that Volume 2 is on its way. I would point out to my colleagues, as I said at the beginning, that we had the room until 5. Apparently we've been able to negotiate an extension of the lease to 5:15, and if Mr. Hitz could agree to stay until that time, I would be thankful.
I can.
I would ask that members try and accommodate with their questions and keep them as concise as possible in hopes that we give Mr. Hitz an opportunity to respond. I would like to start by asking characterization, if I could, Mr. Hitz. I'd like you to characterize the cables and the materials that were reviewed in terms of their comments relating to individuals known to be involved in drug trafficking. Did the cables and materials just acknowledge fact? Did the cables and materials instruct individuals to stay away from these individuals? Were there any warnings or suggestions that CIA officers should stay clear of individuals trafficking drugs and, in fact, should report them accordingly?
As you know, Mr. Chairman, at least from calendar year 1986, there was a prohibition in force against dollars, CIA money, going to individuals or groups found to be involved in drug dealing. As a consequence, I would have to answer your question by saying that for the most part, that tone is contained in the cables, but you have to recognize that the nature of the allegations varied on many occasions. In some cases, it was sort of wild hair rumors that were circulating in the area, and some of the allegations were more deeply rooted. And once again, I'm afraid you're going to be hearing this from me in answer to a number of questions. When we get beyond the specific individuals and acts that were covered in the Volume 1 California story, you're just going to have to be patient and wait for Volume 2, where, in fact, the allegations that were the subject of some of those, that cable chatter, if you will, are central to our investigation.
Thank you. Notwithstanding what your report says for itself, and I know it does speak to this a little bit, generally, were the materials used in your investigation solely produced at the CIA, or did they include materials from other intelligence agencies?
No, we had very good cooperation, as you know, from other agencies, particularly the Department of Justice and the DEA, insofar as CIA records contained information from other agencies, Department of State, for example. We were able to review that as well.
With regard to the individuals who declined to be interviewed by your office, did they give you any reason for their unwillingness to participate in this? I presume you do not have the power for subpoenas.
No, we do not have the power for subpoena of individuals. We do, thanks to the work of this committee and the Congress, now have the power to subpoena documents, but we don't have individual subpoena power. I talked to a number of the individuals, there were only a handful, that refused to talk to us. In fact, I talked to Dewey Claridge. I think that some of the, if I could characterize the attitude that I encountered and that my staff encountered, it was, having gone through the Iran-Contra investigation, that era, several felt that they'd done enough. They'd been through enough. They did not believe that there was any substance to the Mercury accusations, and they just chose not to participate.
In your review, how would you characterize the concerns of CIA managers relating to any potential dealings with individuals who were suspected or known to be trafficking drugs?
I think the '86 prohibition against providing monies to anybody associated with drug trafficking was uppermost in the minds of the managers involved in that period, and it seemed to be reflected in the cable traffic. But again, you'll have to wait for Volume 2, because you will see that some of the allegations of drug trafficking appeared to be more substantial than others, and that would weigh in some of the positions taken.
And finally, for me, Mr. Hitz, did you interview any of the following? Gary Webb?
No, we did not.
Sandra Smith?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Who was that Sandra Smith you said?
Sandra Smith is the lead-off DEA agent in the first of the Dark Alliance stories, the alleged source of the beginning of this.
No, we did not.
Celerino Castillo?
We attempted to, along with the Department of Justice, to work out circumstances under which we could take Mr. Castillo's testimony and we were unable to do so.
Thank you very much. I will have a series of further questions, and I know we all will. Those who have invested the time, and I believe every member of the committee, and obviously colleagues who are interested in this as well, will be submitting record questions for you in writing, if that is agreeable.
That is agreeable.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dix.
Mr. Hitz, I want to thank you for your outstanding work over the years and your cooperation with this committee. I've had a chance to work directly with you for, I think, almost 20 years now. And though we're very concerned about this issue, we are also very pleased with the amount of work and effort that you've made here. And again, as I said earlier, we're going to take all the facts that Congresswoman Waters has put together. Our committee staff and the members will look at that. I urge you, as I understand it, Congresswoman Waters has written you a series of letters so that you've had the benefit to some extent of some of her concerns.
I've had the pleasure of corresponding with both of the congresspersons to my right.
And I compliment both of them, both of our outstanding representatives from California for their consistent effort in this matter. I am disturbed about, and I thank you for being frank. I want to read this again. There are instances where C.I.A. did not, in any expeditious or consistent fashion, cut off relationships with individuals supporting the Contra program who were alleged to have engaged in drug trafficking activity or take action to resolve the allegations. Now, that is a concern. Can you give us any more?
Yes.
Any more sense of that?
Because you're going to be getting Volume 2 before the end of the month, I didn't deem it appropriate to be entirely silent on what it is that you could expect to see. That's sort of a preview, but I have to be very careful, and I think the key word in the passage that you just read from my testimony is allegations. That's where it's going to come down, Mr. Dix, is to how those allegations were weighed. And you are going to pass judgment, as are my colleagues at this table, when they read the report, on whether or not we responded, whether or not the agency responded appropriately in dealing with those allegations. But that's why the report, Volume 2, will be 600 pages long, because we wanted to go into each of these instances in some detail.
And your view is that there wasn't a consistent policy about how this should be dealt with or handled?
Well, I think the 86 prohibition against dealing with any individuals, that is, making money available to any individuals who were involved in drug trafficking, as I say, was uppermost in the minds of the managers and the correspondents in headquarters dealing with these situations. But the point is, they were also involved in a major effort, as you recall, to keep the Contra movement going. Right. And what you will be seeing is a situation where, if the allegation was flimsy or fourth and fifth hand, perhaps the pursuit of running that allegation to ground wasn't as expeditious as it might have been. I don't want to soft pedal it, but that seems to be the manner in which these things were treated.
Was there an effort to try and interview Oliver North or any of the other principals involved during the Reagan administration in the Iran-Contra affair?
We did not seek to interview Oliver North, and we confined our interviews primarily to CIA officials. Let me check with my staff here. Yes, and you must understand, Mr. Dix, that we felt we knew a great deal about what Oliver North's testimony was, because we had access to all the records of his testimony before the Iran-Contra.
Was he ever questioned on this subject?
No. No, he was not.
I would urge that, you know, that it sounds like he'd be one person I think we ought to go interview, or maybe this committee may have to interview him. But because of the incredible lengths he went to fund this operation.
Correct.
I think it raises a very serious issue. And because of the short time, Mr. Chairman, I will end it there. Thank you for your good work. And I want to thank you for your good service to the CIA and to the country.
Thank you, Mr. Dix.
Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my colleagues. I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in this session today. As I did the first of two hearings in Los Angeles, I want to compliment both my colleagues from Los Angeles, Ms. Melinda McDonald, as well as Maxine Waters, for their effort here. Mr. Hitz, I too appreciate your making the effort to come and be with us today, and want to express our appreciation for your long service to the country. The challenge and the problem that we're faced with here, dealing with drug trafficking in the United States, of course, is of major concern to all of us in the Congress. I want to sign on to the statement of my colleague, Mr. Dixon, that says it is not just a congressional problem, but the nation's problem. For all of our people are impacted by the scourge of drugs in our society. Mr. Hitz, I have a number of questions. I'll summarize them. A number of questions relative to Los Angeles activity, and I'd ask you to respond as best you can at this moment, and you might add to it if you feel it's appropriate. Did the CIA have knowledge of drug trafficking by operatives, assets, or employees of the CIA in Los Angeles between the periods of 1979 and 1996, and did any Contra organizations receive any financial support from drug trafficking in the United States during that same period?
Well, as you know, Mr. Lewis, our report indicates what Blandone and Menezes told us, that they made contributions to Contra support groups of between $3,000 and $40,000 each. With respect to the first part of your question, again, we were concentrating primarily on the San Jose Mercury allegations and the Contra connection. And with respect to that, we did not find any knowledge by CIA of a drug tie to the Contras.
Mr. Chairman, if I could do just one additional question and adding to that, and I may supplement this if you would, Mr. What were CIA's legal and regulatory responsibilities from 1979 to 1996 regarding the reporting of potential crimes and the maintenance of relationships with persons suspected of involvement in drug trafficking? And what did the CIA do with information concerning suspected drug trafficking?
Well, it was a movable feast, so to speak, for part of the period in which you were speaking. From 76 to 82, it was an issue that was not really addressed. But from 82 to 95, in an agreement, as I understand it, hammered out between Attorney General Smith and the Reagan administration, there was no requirement to report on allegations of drug trafficking with respect to non-employees of the intelligence agencies. And during that period, non-employees did not include agents of CIA, did not include CIA assets. That has been changed. The agreement in 1995 superseding the 82 to 95 period specifically lists narcotics crimes as reportable, irrespective of whether or not the agency acquires information that they are being carried on by non-employees, namely assets. As a practical matter, and you'll see once again in Volume 2, there are ample instances where we passed word of allegations of drug trafficking to law enforcement during that period. But that definitional situation is the one that I've just described to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hitz. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time. We've got a long list of questioners here. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Hitz, I join those who are sorry to see you leave. I understand you're off to Princeton University. But with proper notice, can you remain available for consultation or testimony if we give you enough notice?
Of course. And I won't be going anywhere before the 30th of April.
Oh, good. In your testimony today and in the Frogman case, which I note you devote a lot of time to, you say that the CIA became involved mistakenly. As I recall, your report indicates that an attorney from the CIA traveled to Northern California and had a conversation with the prosecutor. And I believe your testimony today reflects that you could find no written material by the attorney who, in fact, had that engagement with the prosecutor.
What we did find, of course, and I believe you're familiar with this, Mr. Dixon, is the write-up that was made by the Office of General Counsel commenting on that particular exchange, that intervention with the assassinations, in fact, doesn't have a recollection of it.
Right. And the write-up was not made by the person who was involved?
Well, we don't know that.
We don't know who it was made by, is that right?
Correct. He has no recollection of it.
Right. Now, you come to the conclusion that they interceded because of a mistake, and I believe the report indicates it's a mistaken identity of someone that the CIA did have a relationship with.
That's correct, Mr. Dixon. One of the signatories, let me back just up a bit, and for you and for others who may not have dug into the detail of this particular part of the report, the CIA did not get involved in the Frogman case until several years after the arrests took place. And it came as a consequence of a cable, State Department cable from Costa Rica, saying that an attorney, a private attorney and attorneys from the United States Attorney's Office in San Francisco were about to come to Costa Rica to take the deposition of two signatories to a letter which had been directed to, I guess, the U.S. Attorney's Office seeking to reclaim the $36,000 that had been confiscated on Zavala's arrest. And as near as we can tell from the way that matter was reviewed, what the documents show in the Office of General Counsel, the letter came from what appeared to be Contra support groups, or on behalf of Contra support groups, and one of the signatories the agency mistakenly identified as that of an asset. It was a Hispanic name that was remarkably close to the name of an agent that had worked for us. In the event, as you suggest, a case of mistaken identity. The other signatory, Mr. Aviles, was known to us, and though he was not a CIA agent, he was known to hold a position in a Contra support group. So, not having been able to locate the lawyer who was actually involved in this, and therefore not being able to speak to his or her mindset, it appears what they were trying to do was to protect the identity of the Contra support group's connection, and in that way see if they could keep it from being revealed.
I guess what I'm asking is that did your investigation make an independent evaluation that this was a mistake, or is this something that the CIA told you?
The CIA did not tell us, and in point of fact, we were the ones that discovered that the identity of the agent was mistaken.
Just let me focus on one other question, and that in the Frogman case, there's a gentleman named Gomez, Ivan Gomez, who your report indicates that in fact, I guess was a contract employee of the CIA. Is that correct?
Yes, but I think if I recall correctly, and I'm asking my associate here to find it, I think there was a mistaken identity with respect to Gomez as well, wasn't there, Rick?
Well, I want to get to that. That's the
Yeah.
point in me asking this question here.
Pardon?
The fact is that he was alleged to have been named by Cabasas to have been at a meeting. And at least according to the report, you went to great lengths to try to verify this. That you showed Cabasas 16 pictures.
Yes.
And he failed to identify the gentleman. Well, sometime between the showing of the pictures and the event that alleged to have occurred. But do you have any independent information as to where Mr. Gomez was at the time of this meeting?
Excuse me, Mr. Dixon, let me... If you'll pardon me, I'll just take a quick read through the section here. As you recall, Mr. Dixon, in paragraph 233 of the report on page 86,
right,
we did stipulate that the reason we believed it wasn't the same Ivan Gomez was because he was in the United States and not in Costa Rica during the period when the meeting that Cabezas described allegedly occurred.
Okay. Now, I mean, I think the committee will pursue this, but on 85 at 231 and 86 at 234, you say that perhaps these people got this name Ivan Gomez because it had been published in the newspaper.
Yes.
But it was published in the newspaper after the statement was made, as I recall.
Correct? I see.
So I don't understand how that supports the fact that they could have picked this up from the newspaper, or are you suggesting that there was some underground conversation before it reached the newspaper?
Yes, I'm reminded by my associate here that, in fact, we were told about this in 1997 when we interviewed Cabezas, and that, of course, as you suggest, is not clear from this paragraph.
And finally, did you ask Mr. Gomez, Ivan Gomez, if he attended this meeting?
Yes, we did.
And what was his response?
No. Excuse me. What a
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
misstep.
Mr. Gibbons.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hitt, let me ask a broad general question to begin with. Did your office uncover any information which would have indicated that there was any authorized or unauthorized U.S. government activity which would have facilitated narcotics trafficking in the United States or overseas?
No, we did not. We did not encounter any information that would suggest that there was authorized. And the unauthorized, of course, is the trigger there. What we're trying to say here, Mr. Gibbons, is that for the most part we're going on the written record, the documentation we're able to find in our own records, that which we're able to gather from the Kerry Committee files, the Walsh Committee files. Obviously, if it was unauthorized in the purest sense, there wouldn't be a record of it. What we used the documents for also, of course, was to shape the way in which we interrogated the individuals involved. We knew what the record was, so we could ask intelligent questions. That was our methodology. But, and we found no evidence of a scheme to promote the Contra effort by selling drugs by CIA employees.
Thank you, Mr. Hitz. Did your investigation uncover any evidence indicating the CIA had a relationship with the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department?
Would you pardon me a minute? I want to make sure I'm correct in answering your question. Do you mean, Mr. Gibbons, in connection with the Contras or just generally?
Well, what I'm after there is to find out whether the CIA played any pivotal role or any role in a process, whether it's judicial or administrative, in the prosecution of former Los Angeles County Sheriff's officers or deputies on corruption charges.
No, we did not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Ms. Pelosi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to compliment you for having this open hearing, but I would request that we have another opportunity to question the Inspector General on this report because the room will not be available long enough for all of us to ask even a substantial part of our questions. So,
I concur with that, and we will be, I concur with the observation. We will not have a chance to ask all the questions, and Mr. Hitz has agreed to take some in writing, and I know there will be a lot. I have several. I know others will. And I said in my opening remarks that the committee will proceed as the committee deems appropriate, so the options remain.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, because I do think that when the committee does its own investigation, the answers to these questions, I think, would be very helpful and indeed might even save time at that point. Mr. Hitz, I'd like to know what the ground rules were during this period for contact between the attorneys in the Office of the Counsel General at the CIA and the offices of the U.S. attorneys when a prosecution could involve matters related to CIA operations. And further to that, whether in your own judgment, the contact between the CIA and the U.S. Attorney's Office in this case was appropriate.
We were trying to find what were the precise guidelines that governed contact during this period, and I don't think we were successful, were we? I don't think there were.
Were there any guidelines?
Except good judgment.
Oh.
And obviously the responsibility of the CIA to report crimes to the Department of Justice are specific and detailed and have existed for a long period of time. As to your second question, you can see from our report, which is one of the reasons why we went into it in such detail, that there appears to have been a difference in interpretation of the propriety of the contact between the individual attorney who engaged in it and stated in his write-up of it that he felt he was getting into an area that could cause embarrassment to the President's covert action activity in the Contra matter and drugs. His superior, several months later, writing up a status report on this whole event, felt that he was a calamity howler. I certainly think it would have been the better, more diligent performance of the task if they had avoided the initial mistake, if they had known that the letter writer, the affiant, the person who filled out the affidavit that drew or potentially was going to draw the U.S. attorney to Costa Rica to conduct the deposition, was not, in fact, a CIA asset. But in point of fact, the concern about information coming out about a Contra support group appears to have been, as near as one can tell from the written record, an honest mistake.
You're very generous, Mr. Inspector General. You made the reference that, of course, the CIA would have to report any potential violations of the law to the Justice Department. I wasn't really concerned about that direction. I was concerned about whether the U.S. Attorney's Office would perhaps not proceed in a manner, for the reason you just said, not to jeopardize activities of the CIA. I'm concerned about the converse.
Well,
of that.
I think we're probably splitting it a little too fine there. I can My experience with U.S. attorneys' offices has been, Ms. Pelosi, that if the U.S. attorney felt that he or she had a case in this matter, no intervention from the CIA would have warned them off. They would have gone for it, and appropriately so.
I appreciate
but in
that.
this instance, at least what the written record suggests is that they were trying to get some accommodation. The Office of General Counsel was trying to get some accommodation on the issue of information coming out about the Contra support group. We found no evidence that that Contra support group in this context was involved in drug trafficking.
Appreciate that. As long as we're drawing fine lines, it was one to interpret from your response to one of the previous questions asked about the contact between the CIA and the Sheriff's Office in Los Angeles County. You said generally or in this case. And then you answered specifically to in this case.
Well, I wanted to be sure.
Would one assume from that generally there is?
Well, again, my experience is not wide in the area of, on the law enforcement side, how the Office of General Counsel relates to a sheriff's department, even one as important as the Los Angeles County. So I wanted to be specific on that particular issue. But frankly, the guidelines in the early 80s was probably not as explicit as it currently is, because there's a lot more interaction on drug matters and terrorist matters and other law enforcement questions.
Mr. Chairman, I know that we don't have much more time, so I'm not going to ask any more questions, but I would like to make a couple of observations which would have been reflected in my questions, and that is that I certainly hope that this report is true, because I would hate to have the conclusion be drawn that our government was involved in drug trafficking to benefit the Contras at the expense of the American people, especially in the vulnerable communities that were targeted. But as I listen to what you say, Mr. Heitz, and I appreciate your establishing your limitations. You don't have the power of subpoena. The guidelines weren't clear. Certain things were not reportable at the time. For example, whether an asset that we were engaged with was involved in drug trafficking. And that leads me to conclude that we may have unwittingly, and I use that word generously, have been subsidizing assets who are engaged in drug trafficking to our own peril. I'm glad that the law has changed, that now at least it's reportable. But I, for the life of me, cannot figure out why, as you say in your statement, that the CIA did not know if these assets that they were, whether these people were involved in drug trafficking. At least we should know. Whether it's reportable or not, we should at least know.
We're pretty
I mean, we're the CIA. Shouldn't we know? Doesn't the pen say knowledge is our business or something like that?
Well, we're pretty categorical, though, Ms. Pelosi, on the issue of Blandone and Menezes and their lack of relationship with CIA, Ricky Ross as well. And you'll just have to be patient with us, because in Volume 2 we'll deal with a greater volume of allegations and get away from those central figures. But I think you can take Volume 1 as pretty categorical on the point of Blandone, Menezes, Ricky Ross, Weekly, and Lister.
Yeah. Well, I just think that perhaps in our investigation we can talk to the people you couldn't subpoena. We can figure out why it wasn't worth $35,000 or $36,000 to go to Costa Rica for a deposition, and we can find out if the CIA mistakenly identified and somebody, if they had not mistakenly not identified somebody as well. If they can make a mistake in one direction, they might make one in another direction as well. That is not to say that within the limitations that you have in the Inspector General's office, that you haven't made a good effort to make a presentation to us, but I'm afraid it keeps open some questions that I hoped that it would close. But nonetheless, I thank you for your testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Skaggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it is appropriate to make the observation that this exercise is one that bumps up against the inherent impossibility of proving the negative. that we're trying to establish that something didn't happen, and that is always a ripe field for persons, for whatever reason, who wish to see conspiracy or deception or whatever it may be. So you've got a heavy burden to overcome just in that respect. Most of us are familiar with what inspectors general are all about, but certainly not everybody in the country is, and with the attention to this matter, I thought it would be useful to invite you to explain who you are officially, who you work for, who you report to, who you're accountable to. You know, are you an agent of the Director of Central Intelligence?
Be happy to attempt that, Congressman Skaggs, and I appreciated your earlier remarks. We've had a long friendship, and I hope it will continue even as you leave Congress and I leave this job. I was appointed to this position in 1990 by President Bush. I am the first statutory Inspector General of CIA. This committee played an enormous role in creating the statute that gave rise to the office. I think it's fair to say it flowed out of some of the limitations that the administrative IG was deemed to suffer from that the Iran-Contra affair revealed. We are supposed to be chosen on a nonpartisan basis. We are specifically directed by you to follow the trail wherever it leads. We have independent hiring authority, although we obviously conform to the security rules of the CIA. And I report to the Director of Central Intelligence. I am an executive branch employee, but my reporting does not stop there. This committee benefits from a semi-annual report of our activities that sets forth what inspections, investigations, and audits we've performed over the preceding 6-month period. And we come to this committee on extraordinary occasions, have done it twice, to report significant violations of the rules. Frankly, without your, from the legislative branch, interest in the work that we do, I am sure we would not be able to get it done. Now, we have authority to compel testimony, not by subpoena, from all current employees of CIA. They are subject to dismissal if they do not answer our questions. And there are no files or other materials that are off limits to our search. The Director of Central Intelligence could stop an audit or investigation on vital national security grounds if he chose to do so, but he would have to set forth his reasons for doing so and inform this committee. And that has not happened on my watch. So I appreciate your question so I can set that forth.
The Director of Central Intelligence cannot, or at least in this instance, did not attempt to control your investigation in any way?
He did not.
The staff of the IG's office that assisted in this investigation, can you give us an idea of the extent to which those individuals are career IG staff as opposed to persons that may go back into the agency after serving a tour with you?
We're 90% career cadre in terms of the makeup of our investigative committee, and I suspect the other 10% are going to elect to stick with us as well. The point being that, and one of the things that hasn't been mentioned here, this was a 17-person effort. It took us 18 months. It is a prodigious amount of work. It's one that, as you suggest, is hard simply because of the difficulty of attempting to prove or at least deal with an accusation and to determine whether or not it's well-founded. But no, ours is a career cadre, and I think it's appropriate that it remains so.
Then we should have no fear that any of the people that worked on this were pulling punches because they're eventually next year or the year after or whenever going to go back into the agency to work with the colleagues that they might be critical of.
Correct, and in most instances they will, in order to pull a punch, they would have to done it in full view of some of their colleagues on this team, and it wouldn't have washed, and we would have seen it in terms of the sources for the reviews. No, I have no concern at all that punches were pulled here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Skaggs.
Mr. Bishop, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me apologize for my delinquents in getting here. I had a 2-hour mechanical delay with my flight, and I didn't want to rush that. But I am delighted to be here, and I commend the chairman for holding this hearing, and I welcome the witnesses. I also want to commend Mr. Hitz. I've read the report. I have a statement that I will submit for the record, but I would like to make several observations, the first of which the scope and level of detail of your report I very much appreciate in Volume 1, Mr. Hitz. And I want to join my colleagues in commending you as you retire from the CIA, and I want to take this opportunity to join them in thanking you for your service to the agency and to our country. I also would like to make the observation that allegations of CIA involvement in the introduction and distribution of crack cocaine as alleged in the Mercury articles are very, very serious, and it really created a firestorm. And in minority communities, it immediately generated comparisons to the Tuskegee syphilis study, which, of course, you know, where African Americans were injected with the syphilis germs and were left untreated for purposes of study. And to inject this kind of a communicable disease into our community is horrible and it's terrible. It's a terrible thing for the government to do. And in this day and age, the introduction of drugs, or the allegations of the introduction of drugs, crack cocaine into our community is equally as bad and reprehensible, and we certainly feel it appropriate that this committee and the agency and all interested parties really get to the bottom of it, and I commend you for the effort. I really want to ask you a couple of questions with regard. I note that the report of the investigation indicates that you reviewed over 250,000 documents, pages of documents between September of '96 and December of '97. You interviewed over 365 individuals, and with all of the interviewing and review of documents and the securing of what we believe to be relevant information, let me just ask you, in doing all of this, did your office receive the full and complete cooperation and support from the management of the Central Intelligence Agency?
Yes, we did, Mr. Bishop, and I think we did, at least in part, in no small part, because of the concern you earlier expressed in your remarks. I think the allegations were taken extremely seriously by top management of CIA when the San Jose Mercury pieces first appeared. This committee has clearly taken them seriously, and we, putting as many people on the investigation as we have been equally concerned. So my cooperation was full.
Were the current employees cooperative in providing information, and did any government agency or official or state agency or individual attempt to influence your investigation in any way?
No, we had good cooperation, and nobody tried to push us around.
What about this fellow at the CIA attorney that could not recall the facts of the case or the meeting in question? That doesn't sound to me like full cooperation.
Well, again, Mr. Dix,
the Zavala matter.
It's regrettable in the sense that we would like to have gotten his, if he was the person who authored the document and he's the person that made the intervention with the U.S. Attorney's office, it would have been helpful had he remembered. But we had a pretty good written record, and in point of fact, that's what we were stuck with.
Thank you for yielding.
You're welcome. Would you just tell me what were the CIA's legal and regulatory responsibilities from '79 to '96 regarding the reporting of potential crimes and the maintenance of relationships with persons that were suspected in the involvement of drug trafficking in the Los Angeles areas?
I think just before you arrived, I spoke to a rather odd history there. In point of fact, the period of 82 to 95 was one in which there was no official requirement to report on allegations of drug trafficking with respect to non-employees of the agency, and they were defined to include agents, assets, non-staff employees. That has since been changed since 95. That having been said, I mean, that was the agreement that was struck between then Attorney General Smith and the agency. There are numerous instances of referral of allegations of criminal activity to law enforcement during that period that in fact turned out to involve assets.
I was going to ask also if the CIA intervened, otherwise played a role in any of the investigative or judicial processes involving the prosecution of former Los Angeles County Sheriff deputies on corruption charges.
No, we did not.
Did you uncover any evidence concerning agency attempts to recruit Michael Rupert, who was a former L.A. police officer who claims to have knowledge of CIA links to the narcotics trafficking?
We found no evidence of such efforts.
Has the CIA ever had any relationship with Mr. Rupert? And if so, what was the nature of that relationship?
Only, I think, as detailed in the report. None. 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 Excuse me.
And I assume that you've already covered this, whether or not the CIA had any information concerning the drug trafficking activities in Los Angeles by individuals affiliated with the Contra movement. I assume that you've already covered that.
We have, and to repeat it, our concentration in this California story was CIA employee involvement with any assets who were running drugs and the Contras. So we have, as you know, been reported on the statements of both Menezes and Blandone that they made proceeds of their drug operations available between $3,000 and $40,000 to Contra support groups, but there was no CIA involvement in that.
Yeah, in the procedures that you outlined, you indicated that there were several people that you did not interview because they declined to give information. Is that?
That's correct. Excuse me, yes.
And do you believe that the outcome of the investigation would have been different had you been able to have access to them and to their testimony?
We do not believe so. We would like to have taken their testimony to be absolutely sure, but we do not believe so.
All right. I appreciate the Chair's indication that we would continue this at the committee's pleasure at a later time, and with that I will cease my questioning. And thank you very much, Mr. Hitz.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Bishop, thank you. I wanted to yield for a closing comment very briefly to Mr. Dix, but before I did, I wanted to also point out one more time that we are greatly obliged to our colleague and member of this committee, a very senior, valued member of this committee, and a member of Congress who is also senior and valued as well, Mr. Julian Dixon, for the extraordinary amount of work he has done. Not to say that all the other members have not acquitted themselves very honorably and done their homework as well, but Mr. Dixon has been preeminent, and I wanted to thank him publicly for that. And I would yield very briefly to him to respond.
Mr. Chairman, but I don't want to leave the impression, I don't think, committee, that the work is over with. I mean, this...
Not at all.
All right.
I was setting you up, actually, for what's coming next. Mr. Dix.
I do want to concur in those very fine remarks, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Dixon's done an outstanding job. Going back to the question I asked you about the, your look ahead into the second report, You've indicated that your investigation has found instances where CIA did not expeditiously and consistently cut off relations with individuals supporting the Contras who were alleged to have engaged in drug trafficking. Did any of these allegations involve trafficking in the United States?
Yes?
Did any of these allegations involve trafficking in California?
No. That was covered by Volume 1. Not specifically.
Did your investigation attempt to resolve these allegations?
Well,
or do we have to wait for Volume 2?
Frankly, Mr. Dix, we wanted to put a spotlight on the allegations and the exchange of information. We haven't, I think, as such, taken any position on them, but you will see that when we set them forth, I think you'll be in a position to make up your own mind as to the gravity of the allegations and come to your own conclusions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. We are beyond the appointed hour, and I know that we have added even longer to the length of your already long day, Mr. Hitz, but we're very thankful. As you can tell, there's a great deal of interest. There will indeed be several follow-up questions coming along on this subject as we proceed with our investigation in the Select Committee. Some of those areas of questions we will be asking. I want to give you a little bit of a heads up. I don't know whether you've done any costing work yet, but we're interested in how much this is costing, and realizing that you've got so many hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, we're looking a little bit at it from our own staff equity point of view too. And the second thing I would point out for members, I have promised that we are going forward. We all know that we are, and we are not going to necessarily suggest that all of this is going to be done publicly. I would tell members, however, that there has been a lot of testimony and concern about these 7 members who declined to participate in Mr. Hitz's efforts. We have been in contact, I understand, with all 7 of them, and we have varying degrees of response. So I offer that only as a token of the commitment to proceed forward on this. And
we'd like to add Mr. Strickland to that list.
Well, we will certainly take that under advisement if you're talking about the Mr. Strickland of this report.
Would we also like to ask consent to put a few of the articles into the record?
Absolutely, without objection. I would like to ask one final question, Mr. Hitz, if I could. I have read this report very closely. It is a narrow report. It focuses, as you say, a spotlight on a specific set of allegations. The report, I think, is very clear in what it says. It is signed by you.
Yes.
Did you sign this report without reservation, and do you stand behind what this report says?
I did, and I do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's attention and participation in this. This meeting is concluded.